Will you take a Bible, loved ones, and turn to Romans chapter 10 and verse 2. And while we're turning to it, I just say to those of you at home on television, watching television, that we tend to use the standard version when we're studying on these Sunday mornings, Romans 10 and verse 2. And this is the verse, loved ones, we've come to. I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but they are not enlightened. I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but it is not enlightened. And Paul is speaking about his Jewish friends. I think God wants to use it this morning to destroy a lie that we often share with each other. And that's the lie, as long as you're sincere, that's all that matters. As long as you're sincere, that's all that matters. You know, we often say that to each other and to our friends. That's the big thing. As long as you're sincere, that's what really counts. I think we say it because hypocrisy and pretense are so prevalent in personal relationships that we feel, well, at least if you can get a person to be sincere, you know who you're dealing with. And so we tend to say the important thing is that you're sincere. That's what counts. Do you know where the word comes from? It's interesting. Sincere. It's from two Latin words, sine, which means without, and cera, which means wax. And it means without wax. And in Greek and Roman times, when a crack occurred in marble, they would fill it in with wax. And so marble without wax was marble that had no flaw in it, and that was absolutely real marble the whole way through. And so we often feel, well, just a little more content if we can say the person we're dealing with is sincere. We feel at least he's being what he appears to be. And yet, we know that it doesn't really work in everyday life. It isn't enough to be sincere in everyday life. Two roads fork. One goes north, the other goes east. The one going north goes to a large city. The one going east goes over a deep, deep chasm. But the bridge has collapsed. Our friend chooses the road to the east, travels along it at 50 miles an hour, comes to the chasm, flips down and is killed. We don't say, well, at least he was sincere. We don't. Because he's now sincerely dead. And we know that the vital factor was not that he was sincere or was insincere. The vital factor was that he made the wrong choice. And so in ordinary everyday life, it's not enough to be sincere. You have to be sincerely right. And we know it ourselves in our own lives. We great men who are so expert on automobiles, we know that we have often been very sincere in this great deal that we got on this automobile. And our friends and our wives can tell how sincere we are by the fixed, glazed stare in our eyes as we happily lay our money down and buy the automobile. And it didn't matter how sincere we are the next week when the piston went through the cylinder wall. And we know Hitler was sincere, and Stalin was sincere, and Machiavelli was sincere, and Manson was sincere, and Oswald was sincere. And the truth is, it isn't enough to be sincere. We see that in everyday life. The question is, are you sincerely right, or are you sincerely wrong? And it is amazing, but our standards of thinking and acting often operate in inverse proportion to the importance of the subject. Because we have a tendency to say, well, you're right. That axiom, as long as you're sincere, that's all that matters. You're right, it doesn't work in everyday life situations, but it does work in regard to seeking God. In regard to seeking God, as long as you're sincere, that's all that matters. Now, it is a little ridiculous, isn't it? Because if the principle doesn't hold in everyday practical life situations, how is it going to hold in relationship to the person who made those everyday life situations? So it's really illogical to say that, but I think you'll agree that we often do say it. How many of us here believe that all roads lead to Rome? How many of us here have often said to a person, well, listen, whatever your belief about God, the big thing is you're sincere about it, and that's all that counts. I'd like you to know, we toured Italy on a motorcycle and found out, to our dismay, that all roads don't lead to Rome, especially when you want to get to Rome. So even that is untrue. But don't you agree that often we think, yeah, well, it may not be true in everyday life, but it's true as far as God is concerned. As long as he gets sincerity, it doesn't matter what way you're seeking him, doesn't matter what religion or what way you're using, as long as you're seeking him, that's what matters, if you're seeking him sincerely. Now, I think, loved ones, many of us get that belief from the Bible. I think many of us hold that view because of a verse in Scripture, and I'll show you it. It's Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah 29. And it's verse 13. It's page 677, loved ones. Jeremiah 29 and verse 13. There's a well-known verse that we often quote. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And I think many of us really misinterpret the word heart. We think, oh yes, heart. Heart is my emotions. And if I seek God with my emotions and with all the feeling I have, then I'll certainly find them. And so we tend to say, all right, I'm seeking God with all my heart, and that's what counts. And really, loved ones, heart in the Bible does not simply mean my emotions. It means the very deepest part of my whole being. It means the deepest part of me. It means I'm seeking him with all the best that I possibly can produce. It means I'm seeking him with my intellect, with my emotions, my will, with my conscience, with my whole being. And do you see that no one living today can say he is seeking God or she is seeking God with the best of all that they can produce in their personalities if they're ignoring the unique man who has lived in our era, who has told us more about our Creator than any other human being? Do you see that? You can't honestly say, oh, now I'm seeking God with everything I've got, with the very best I can produce, with the best that my mind can produce, with the best that my conscience can produce, the best that my will can produce. I'm seeking Him with the very best I can produce. Unless you really do respect that unique person, Jesus, who lived in the first century and has told us more about our Creator than any other human being. And of course, this is the very person that split our history into BC and AD. So it's hard to argue you're seeking God with the best that your mind can produce if you ignore this person. This is the person whose birth has brought about Christmas. It's the person whose resurrection causes us to observe Easter. So it's hard to say, oh yeah, I'm seeking God with the best part of myself, and yet ignore the exclusiveness of Jesus' sayings. And I'll show you one of them. And it is exclusive, loved ones. It has little of that generalized, as long as you're sincere about it. It's John chapter 14 and verse 6. John 14 and verse 6. And it's page 938. John 14 and verse 6. Jesus said to him, to Thomas, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Now, do you see the forcefulness of that? Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Yeah, but if you're a Buddhist, as long as you're sincere, that's what counts. Jesus doesn't say that. Jesus says, no one comes to the Father but by me. That's why Peter, you remember, preached and said, there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved, except Jesus. Now, loved ones, I would just press you on your logic. Do you see that when we say all you need to be to find God is be sincere, that is a direct contradiction to Jesus' statement, no man comes to the Father but by me. If you like to say, boy, isn't Jesus being narrow-minded? Yes, he is. He's being very narrow-minded. He's saying, no one comes to the Father, comes to the Creator, finds God real in his life, unless he comes through me and by me. Now, brothers and sisters, when we say, yeah, but as long as you're sincere, that's all that matters for finding God, we're contradicting Jesus. And if Jesus were just anybody, who cares? But this is the only man in our world that has left the earth and come back and assured us that he was in the other world, and that he knows our Father in a unique, close, intimate way that no other human being does. And it's this man that says, no one comes to the Father but by me. And you know, we're just cavilling. We're just arguing for the sake of arguing when we say, oh, well, wait a minute. What about all the other people who have never heard of Jesus? Now, loved ones, that's not our situation. I mean, that's not the situation of anybody here in the States. And Jesus has covered that plainly by saying they will be judged by their response to the light that's been given to them. They'll be judged by their response to the movement of Jesus' Spirit as he is able to move within them according to the limited light that they have received. But do you see, we are responsible for our friends. We're responsible for ourselves. and our colleagues here in the States. So don't let's drag an irrelevancy across the discussion. The truth is, when you and I pass ourselves in conversation, and you know how often we do it, when you and I pass ourselves in conversation and say, well, that's right, sure. Oh, yes, you believe that? Oh, well, whatever you believe, as long as you're sincere about it, that's the main thing. There are many different roads to God, and they'll all bring you to God eventually, and we'll all come by different ways and different strokes for different folks, but we all get there at the end. And that's good as long as you're sincere. I'm sincere in mine, and you be sincere in yours. Loved ones, there are dear words of a dear person called Jesus that will echo in our ears on our deathbeds if we pass ourselves in conversation like that during this life. And those words will be, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Why is sincerity not enough? Why is it not enough to be sincere? Well, because most sincerity methods, if not all sincerity methods, assume that we are basically okay. And all we have to do is discipline our actions and direct our thoughts a little differently, and we'll find our way to God. That's it. The attitude and assumption underlying that comment, as long as you're sincere, assumes that we are basically all right. And if we just discipline our actions and direct our thoughts a little differently, we'll find our way up to God ourselves. Now, that attitude was the cause of mankind's break with God at the beginning. It was, loved ones. If you look at it, it's in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 5. Genesis 3 and verse 5. Genesis 3 and 5. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That's why we broke with God at the beginning. We reckoned if we just know what is right and know what is wrong, the rest is easy. We'll become like God. And do you see, that underlies the attitude as long as you're sincere. It's the feeling that, oh, sure, just tell me what to do to please God. Just tell me what to avoid to please Him. And the rest is simple. I'll do it. And of course, the rest is not easy. The rest is not simple. And that's why we are led continually into deception and unreality when we assume, sure, I can be like God. Just tell me what's right and tell me what's wrong. And that's why so many of us are wrong when we say, yeah, I'm sincere. Yeah, you go to campus? Oh, yeah. Well, I don't go to church, but boy, I live by the golden rule. I'm sincere. I live by the golden rule. You know what? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the way I live. And I know that if I do that, then God will be pleased enough with me at the end. And I'm sincere about that. So you have your faith and I have mine, but we'll see each other at the end, you know. Of course, there are flaws in it all through. First of all, none of us do live by the golden rule. We live by bits and pieces when it suits us, and when it doesn't suit us or is going to hurt us, we don't live by it. But the other flaw in it, loved ones, is That when we do live by the golden rule, we feel it's our own righteousness that has managed to do that. We feel it's our own good that has produced that golden rule in us. And most people who say, oh yeah, I live by the golden rule, they feel they're doing it themselves. They feel that they can be like God, outside and inside, by their own efforts, because they believe that they have goodness inside them. And of course, God's word just tears it apart, loved ones. And I'd ask you to look at a verse that seems to me not many of us know, but it's a verse that I often heard when I was in Ireland. It's Isaiah 64 and verse 6. And it puts all that self-righteousness firmly in its place. Isaiah 64 and verse 6. It's page 643. Isaiah 64 and verse 6. We have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment. All our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment. And I learned it in the King James Version, you know. It says, all our righteousness is as filthy rags. And loved ones, the very best that you and I can produce is tainted with self-exaltation and self-glorification and self-will. We're good as long as it doesn't do us any harm, as long as it doesn't hurt us. But inside, we have a selfish heart that only pretends to be unselfish. And all our righteousness, compared with the purity of Jesus' Spirit, is as filthy rags. And by the works of the law, no man can be saved. None of us. It doesn't matter how good we are. It doesn't matter if we have a great day every day. We're still producing it independent of God and by our own efforts and the way we want to do it. In other words, we're always doing it my way. Even when we're good, we're doing it my way, the way that pleases me. And we're doing it independent of God's own Spirit. And to that extent, we're still flesh. We're still temporary people who will not last beyond this lifetime. And so all of us who say, oh, well, I'm sincere, you know, I'm sincere, I believe all the things they say in Colson's book, all those things about Jesus, I believe all those. In fact, I go to all the meetings. If Colson's here, I'm there. If Graham's here, I'm there. If Larry Norman is here, I'm there. I'm at all the meetings. And Bible studies, I have them coming out of my ears. I go to 5 Bible studies. I have so many Bible studies that my home's falling apart. But I go to Bible studies, and I go to church. I go to the best churches, the best, most orthodox churches. Fundamentalists with them all the time. Singing hymns, I sing hymns all the time. Give money, I give money to Northwestern College all the time. And I'm sincere about all this. Loved ones, do you see that you can be sincere about all those things? And all they are is good works that you're producing yourself. And the righteousness in that it's your own is as filthy rags. And it isn't enough to be sincere. Paul says, listen, they have a zeal for God, but it's not enlightened. And loved ones, how many of us have a zeal for God? At least a zeal for God's affairs. We love to be with religious people. We love to be among Christians. We love to be where Christian action is. But we ourselves have never, ever come to Calvary. Because, of course, that's the only way to God. God himself says, you are not basically right. You are basically wrong. Even in your desire to be like me, it's as if you're saying, fellow God, I want to be like you. And God says, you're doing it as if you're God too, as if you can be like me just by exercising a little effort. I tell you, you are basically perverted. You are a sinner. You have nothing of my heart in your heart. You live off people. You live off circumstances. You live off others. You live off things. You don't live off me. And what you need is to be changed radically from the inside. And loved ones, that's the only way to God. To at last admit that you are rat number one. That you are all the time trying to defend yourself, all the time trying to establish your goodness, all the time trying to prove to others that you're good and righteous, and inside you're filled with envy and jealousy and unclean thoughts and anger. And what you need is to be changed. And that's the only way to be God. That's why it can only be by Jesus, you see. Buddha did not allow you to be placed in himself and destroyed there and raised from the dead. Buddha did not rise from the dead. Muhammad did not allow any man to be placed in himself because he was only a human being. He couldn't. He didn't even exist before the world was. But Jesus existed with the Father before the world was ever created and allowed all of us, with all our sincerity and our self-righteousness and our pride and our indignation and our anger and our bad temper, to be placed in himself and destroyed in him. And we have been changed. And the only way to please God and to find God is to believe that. To accept that one died for all, therefore all of us here have died. All of us have been destroyed with Jesus and regenerated and renewed. And all we have to do is accept that this morning. Believe that. And allow his Spirit to produce in us the life and the love of his Father. But that's the only way to God. Sincerity is not enough. The way is actually very narrow. And if you go up the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem, you will find that it sets forth the spiritual truth. It is a narrow way. It is a narrow, narrow way. And only those of us who are prepared to admit that we need to be changed inside and are prepared to accept that we have been changed in Jesus and we have been destroyed with him and recreated in his resurrection, only those of us who are prepared and willing to have that made real in our lives will find God. I don't think there's one of us will not face that cliche this week. I think you probably agree. Probably not one of us. But will face that cliche in some form this week. Some dear friend, some colleague will imply, if they don't say it, they'll imply, as long as you're sincere. Loved ones, do you yourself believe that? If you do, believe me, it isn't true. And if you agree with them, are you not denying your Lord, who will be forced to deny you before his Father in heaven? I know it's awkward. I agree with you. I think it's embarrassing. And I think there are right moments to disagree with them. But I would encourage you, if you really don't believe that, will you begin to share honestly with your friends at work and at school? And then I'd ask you yourself, are you on that narrow way? Do you admit that you need to be changed? And do you accept that you have been changed in Jesus? Because you have. You have. You don't need to live the way you're living now. You don't. It's amazing, but you don't. You don't need to live the way you're living now. There is another you that is available to you this moment by the power of the Holy Spirit. If you will admit that you have been crucified with Christ, and you're now with him alive, and he is in you, and by that very faith, you will release his Spirit in your life. You will. You can change today. I pray, that somebody will. Pray that you'll just, when we bow our heads in a moment, that you'll just say, Lord, I do need to be changed, and I accept that I have been changed in you, and I trust you to live in me now. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, we would pray that now. Thank you that you are in us. Thank you that we are with you in our Father's family, and that all that you are is now in us, and we can live this coming week and months by your life and your strength in us, not our own. We ask your Spirit to show us more each of the coming days of the ways in which you want to be yourself in us for your glory. Amen.